part 12B. So I'm sorry about that. I have a dry throat, I've got allergies, and it's dusty. So anyways, we're just gonna carry on here with part 12B. All right, so we were talking about the Passover lamb and breaking the bones. So anyways, here we go. So I examined the possibility that perhaps this is a spiritual type and shadow of the Exodus Passover lamb. Yet in the John passage we just saw, he's not making a spiritual connection, but a physical fulfillment. So what was Jesus to fulfill? The physical side or the spiritual side? The spiritual connections? And that begs the question, if we are looking for physical requirements, then why just pick that one and leave out all the rest? What's so significant about legs being broken or not being broken? I'm reminded of a story about a grandmother who swore she was psychic. All right, just go with me here. So she would try to make predictions and show her kids and grandkids that she was truly unique. And without fail, her predictions were usually wrong and no one really took her seriously. But one time, she did get something right that she had predicted to her and to her family, and she said, "See, I really am psychic. You just didn't have enough faith in your old grandma." The grandmother was totally convinced of her abilities. So did she predict the future that one time out of hundreds that she got wrong? Or was it just coincidence that that 1 out of 100 prediction happened to be right? If one thing is similar in the account of Jesus dying, that happens to be one similarity out of like 100 requirements of the lamb from the story of the Exodus, is that then a true fulfillment? Or was it just coincidence that something was similar? If John is making a physical connection to the lamb's legs not being broken, then why did he just put that one requirement in the spotlight? The lambs were also to be physically unblemished, not beaten up as Jesus was. The lambs were to be brought before the priest to be offered on the altar, and Jesus was killed by Roman soldiers outside the city. The lambs were to be burnt up. Well, Jesus was not burnt. And these are a few ideas about what the physical fulfillment might look like. So why was the author of John just selective about the broken bones part of this? Was it just coincidence that Jesus happened to not have his bones broken as it's recorded in the New Testament? And then therefore through this coincidence, we're retrofitting that part into a line from the Psalms that has absolutely nothing to do with messianic prophecy, but rather, of course, as we saw, it's about righteous men who sometimes fall, but Jehovah guards them, so much that no harm comes to them, not even one of their bones are broken. I learned a little piece of interesting history about Egypt at the time that this was happening, and about the time, at the time about the lambs. And I would encourage anyone to search this out, but for the sake of the time, we know that Pharaoh originally consented to allow for the Hebrews to sacrifice there in Egypt where they were, but Moses realizes that to do so would be highly offensive to the people of Egypt, so much so that they would probably be stoned for sacrificing one of the Egyptian sacred animals, which was the ram. So Exodus 8:22 speaks about this if you want to look that up. So lambs or rams were a god to the Egyptians. Therefore, isn't it interesting that Jehovah had them slaughter lambs in Egypt right where they were because Pharaoh was so stubborn? To the Egyptians, that would have been an abomination, yet it's almost a way of insulting the Egyptians from Jehovah's perspective. And I kind of think that's cool. That's kind of ballsy. So Jehovah had Israel kill the valued pagan ram god, and from killing that idol, it protected the people of Israel. Killing or putting away one of the pagan gods kept the Israelites safe. We'll have fun plugging Jesus into that allegory. I see again that only parts and selected pieces could possibly be types and shadows with the story of the Passover lamb. Exodus 12 is recording history. Jehovah even tells us in this chapter why we should remember the Passover every year, and it never has anything to do with looking forward. And this would have been such an excellent place to use as a teaching tool for the whole of Israel and for those who would read it later. This would be such a great place to stop and say something like, "Each year, remember the Passover to Jehovah," For as I did with the Passover in Egypt, I will surely bring a great deliverance again through my Son, who will be the official Lamb who will save. So be sure to believe that he is the Lamb that I sent. You know what I mean? But not once is anything mentioned about the Passover being an event that we look forward to again. But it is always about looking back to the greatness of Yehovah and his might. Everything about the Passover instructions given in the scriptures is about looking back and remembering. It's about remembering Yehovah, no one else. I want to pause for just a minute because I think this is a good place to share a little more of my feelings regarding the topic of biblical messianic prophecy. Originally, I had started going through these prophecies with a small group of friends, and having started this list of 365, it was becoming more and more evident that in the case of what Christians would call prophecies, in context, we're really not. It just becomes so clear when you sit down and go through the list, acknowledging the context of the passage. And I know that is very troubling to some. Indeed, it did strike a few nerves with some people in the study because I get how adamant we are about Jesus having, come from our Christian backgrounds. And not even halfway through the study, it came to a halt. I'm not sure if I was being directly blamed for this or if it was just a general statement, but the accusation was, I think this study is just trying to disprove Jesus. It doesn't feel like a messianic study. It feels like we're just trying to disprove him. And I don't think this person realizes how ironically true that statement was and how much truth there is behind it. Simply by reading the passages in context more and more was it showing that Jesus was not the one being talked about. So I can see how to someone it would sound like we're trying to disprove him. No, we're just reading these passages in context. And, that was never the intention going into this messianic study. We weren't trying to disprove Jesus. But this is what the scripture was starting to reveal. Well, to me anyways. And feathers seemed to be ruffled. But all I could do was sigh, shrug my shoulders, and carry on independently in my own quest to see what Yehovah says in his word. The problem is that we have come to accept certain passages as messianic before we had even really determined in their context if this was true. So to take passages commonly accepted as messianic and to study them out showed that many, if not most, were not messianic. And in doing this, yes, it does sound like you're trying to disprove Jesus. The reality is that I was not trying to disprove him, but really determine what is and what is not messianic, and that's a big difference. What I'm saying is there's a difference between trying to disprove Jesus and just trying to determine what is and what is not messianic. Because if you determine a passage is not messianic when traditionally you've always held that was about Jesus, it sounds like then you're just trying to disprove him, but that's not the case. Just determining what is and what is not messianic is all I was after. And I share this story because it would seem like I've been accused of going into a study about the Messiah as though I'm trying to disprove Jesus. And that is not at all how it started. I went into it knowing that it would prove Jesus, and so, that way I could have a leg to stand on when I talk to non-Messianic Jews. However, you kind of know the end of my story here already, and that when looking at Scripture, it very clearly showed me where I was getting it wrong. So I'm sharing this with whoever happens to be hearing this or reading this, what I've learned about some tricky passages, and that they are used to say that they're Messianic when I've seen that they're really not. The last three I'm going to write about or talk about, they're very difficult, and I understand. And these are ones nobody questions in Messianic circles, and I can only speak for myself, but I never really took a hard look at them either. I only accepted what I'd been told about them from those guys in seminary that know more than us, and because of this, I missed so much for so long. So I hope that I can eloquently share my thoughts in a way that are understandable regarding these last three alleged messianic prophecies, which I'll go ahead and give you a spoiler alert, are not. These three would be Isaiah 53, the suffering servant, Isaiah 7 and 9 about the virgin birth issue, and then Daniel chapter 9. So we'll go into those in the next part. But for now, this is the end of this part 12b.